My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, June 10th, 2008, and I'm in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, interviewing Donna Nigh. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Former First Lady of Oklahoma Donna Nigh was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 1995. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Juliana.
Well, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you start with where you grew up and give us a little insight into your early life?
My early life was very simple. I grew up in Oklahoma City, in the south part of Oklahoma City, and I actually was not born here. I was born in a small town, Morris, Oklahoma, which is by Okmulgee. But it was sort of just a case of, my mother went home to have the baby. I never lived there. So I have always lived here in Oklahoma City. Went to Oklahoma City Public Schools, graduated from Capitol Hill High School. My father owned, 2 or 3 different businesses, small businesses, a grocery store, and then later a restaurant in downtown Oklahoma City. I grew up with one sibling. I have a sister who is 2 years older than I that lives in Dallas. We had a very normal childhood, wonderful parents, great home life, very involved in our church. I loved high school, had a wonderful high school experience, and back in the time when I was in high school, my high school, which was Capitol Hill, dominated everything in Oklahoma City as far as high schools were concerned, because it was the only high school in South Oklahoma City. So it was fun. It was great fun. It was a very large high school, lots of activities, things to be involved in. And I basically was, I was involved in, lots of the clubs and things like that, but I was in the band, and that took up a lot of my time. I played saxophone, and, back in the days of twirlers, I was a twirler, and later was band queen. So band took up a great deal of my time because of all the practices and traveling with the team and things like that. But a lot of my very close friends are the friends I went to high school with, and that's been a long time ago. I graduated from high school in 1951, so those friends are still very dear to me. And I know a lot of people, when they get out of high school, they go away to college and they never come back home. And they sort of lose touch with that, with their early friends. But our early friends are still very important to me. There's a group of us, we call ourselves the Naughty Nine. And that group is smaller now because we've lost 2 or 3 members, but we still get together once or twice a year and have a great time. But and I always worked in the summer times at my father's restaurant, so I was a waitress from probably the time I was about 16 years old in the summer those years. But lucky for me, it was a restaurant that opened very early in the morning and then closed. It was in an office building downtown, so there was no night duty. But we had a great time. Those were the years of really a lot of dancing. We spent all of our evenings going to places where we could dance. And at that time, there were a lot of outdoor places, teen towns, things of that nature where the high school kids could go. And we danced, and we danced. And I can truthfully say I'm still a better dancer than any of my grandkids. I know how to really dance. They just sort of get out there and wiggle. And my husband is a very good dancer also. So we still dance, and we love to dance. But anyway, my high school days were great days. And as far as really thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, the only thing I really thought seriously about was going to nursing school. But I, as many young people do, decided at a very early age that I wanted to get married. So I did. And it was not a successful marriage. So at a very young age, I found myself a single mother. I had a son. And, I look back now and think I still could have done what I really wanted to do. But in those days, if you had a child, you just didn't go off and go back to school and do things like that. So I had gone to college for 2 years, and I went to what is now UCO, but at that time it was Central State Teachers College. And I really never ever thought about being a teacher. And then when everything sort of closed in on me and I found myself having to provide for myself and my son, I just never went back to school, which is, if you had to say your one big regret in life, that's been mine. As an older adult, I certainly have had the opportunities and did not take advantage of them. I always found a reason not to. I was too involved, too busy. I really didn't need to do that. The excuses go on and on. But anyway, I was very fortunate in the workplace. I was always able to have a good job to provide for my son and myself. And my first really serious job was with Southwestern Bell Telephone. And I worked there for a few years, got a lot of wonderful experience. They have a great training program. So I felt very fortunate. And one day, we had a carpool to get to work. And one day, someone in the carpool said, Trans World Airlines is coming to Oklahoma City, and they're having interviews today at noon, and told me the location. And I thought, So without telling anyone, on my lunch break, I went over and had an interview with Trans World Airlines, and was successful in obtaining a job. And that was wonderful for me and was a great opportunity for me. And so I left the telephone company. I had to go to California to be trained, and they were bringing service to Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And I was going to be, in those days you could not be, we called them stewardesses, now they're flight attendants. You could not be a flight attendant if you had a child. So I was trained for reservations and ticketing. And those were the days when all major airlines had downtown ticket offices. So all of the major airlines were located basically in the same area downtown. We had Continental and Braniff and American and TWA and Central Airlines. And anyway, it was a great little community because we were all right there together. And So I worked in the TWA ticket office, which was located in the old Skirvin Hotel. And people asked me, or asked George, how did you meet Donna? And he says, I met her in a hotel, without explaining, of course, that I was working for an airline in a hotel. But that really was how we met. He came through the office a lot, and we met that way. And by then, my son was 11 years old. So I basically had been a single mom for about 10 years. And really, getting married again, I knew I would someday, but it was not at the top of my list, because I had a job I loved. I was able to provide, in those days, very well for Mike and myself. And so, I thought if and when it happens, it'll happen. And George came into my life, and he had already been in the legislature. He had already served one term as lieutenant governor, and had run for governor and was defeated. So he was out of politics when I met him. And, the name George Nigh meant nothing to me. The only thing political I'd ever done was vote. Politics was just out of my realm of thinking. So when I met him, he was just working at a job like all the rest of us, and I didn't dream, I never thought about the fact that he might get back into politics. Not that it wouldn't have made any difference to me, but anyway, it was a whirlwind romance. We met, and 6 months later we were married. And that was in 1963. Everyone kept telling me that I was marrying the state's most eligible bachelor, because he was 36 years old and I was 30. And I could never quite figure that out, because that I was getting such a good deal, because at that time he basically did not have a permanent job. He did not have a house. He did not have a car. And he was $100,000 in debt from his last campaign. And in those days, well, it's still a lot of money, but it really was a lot of money back then. But somehow or another, people thought that, I was getting the good deal. And, of course, I really was. As it turned out, I really was. But, so he moved into my house, and it wasn't always like you wished it could have been, because after Mike and I having lived by ourselves for 11 years, Mike was very jealous of a man coming into my life, because he'd always had, all he'd ever known was just the two of us. But we worked very hard to work things out, and of course they did. And of course, George, being a 36-year-old bachelor, he immediately wanted a family. And so a year and a half later, we had our daughter named Georgiana. And I think it was sort of at that time, it was a turnaround for Mike, because when he first heard that I was going to have a baby, he didn't like it. And he really wasn't very nice the 9 months. But the minute she was born, she was his. And he literally was her third parent, because he was 13 years older than she. And he absolutely adored her. He took care of her. He said, "You never hire a babysitter unless you ask me first if I'm going to be available." But of course, that changed when he got his driver's license. But anyway, he was so proud of her, and when we went out, he always wanted to be the one to push the stroller because he was so proud of her. She had this big head of hair, and he'd look at other babies that were bald, and he just didn't think they were nearly like his little sister. But anyway, as I said, George was not in politics when we got married. So when we went on our honeymoon, we were in Israel, and people say, well, that's a strange place to go on a honeymoon. But, we had very little money. And at that time, he was working for the International Junior Chamber of Commerce. And Oklahoma was bidding to have the conference in Oklahoma. So the conference that year was going to be in Israel. So they sent George to Israel to bid for Oklahoma to get it. Well, TWA was the official airline for the JCs, so TWA sent me to man the booth at the JC conference. So we got a free honeymoon. So that's why we were in Israel. But anyway, I'm telling you all that because we were there when President Kennedy was assassinated. So, you always remember where you were when this happened or this happened or this happened. So I'll never forget how traumatic it was to be in a foreign country when your own president was assassinated. And I came back home because I had to go to work. George stayed over there because he had to continue on to go to do some other business. But anyway, we lived, as I said, we lived in my house. I continued to work for the airlines, and did continue to work for them until Georgiana was born. And then later, a few years later, I went back and worked for them again. So I worked for them for, about 10 years overall. So when we'd been married, when the next election came around, about 3 years later, George got the idea that he'd like to run for lieutenant governor again. He'd already served one term. Had been out of office 4 years. And he asked me what I thought, and I said, I didn't know what to think because I had no idea what was in store for me. But I said, if that's what you really want to do, I'll do all I can. Well, it was indeed a learning experience to be thrown into the world of campaigning, which is like nothing you can imagine. And I look today at the candidates, particularly the national candidates, knowing what it's like on a statewide basis. I cannot imagine what it would be like on a national basis. But back in the 60s, it was the old style of campaigning. You literally walked the streets. You went door to door. And it wasn't an all media thing like it is now. So we worked very hard, and I traveled a lot, and there were a lot of organized groups back then, which are not nearly as active now, like the Democratic women's groups, or just different groups that I would travel with. And I learned to go out on my own, not to hang on to his coattail. And I just learned by doing things that I'd never done before. like speaking in public, and being very out front, not holding back, and trying to educate myself as to the process and what he was asking the people of Oklahoma to allow him to do, like what the office of lieutenant governor was all about, and so it was really hard. That first campaign was really hard because trying to juggle and never having done it before, a home life for your children, and to be gone as much as I was gone. But my parents were very supportive and would help me with the children. But anyway, we were successful. So George was elected to his second term as lieutenant governor. And I really learned to be, I didn't just want to be the wife of, I wanted to have an agenda of my own. And so I learned early on to find the things that I wanted to do and the things I was interested in, and to try to have my own life besides just follow around after him. So I did become involved in a lot of projects, but also back then, the office of lieutenant governor was not, really didn't have any specified duties. You sort of did what the governor wanted you to do. And George sort of created his own agenda and his own image, and he became very involved in tourism and industrial development for the state. So we traveled a lot around over the state, and I don't think there's any town or community in Oklahoma that I haven't been in many times, but I can honestly say that I loved every minute of it. And through the years, I have met and been with women who have been wives of politicians that did not enjoy their life and were really very miserable. And I think how horrible that would be, because it's a lifestyle that you're trapped into, and to not be happy in it. But I really enjoyed it. But as I said earlier, it was something that I had to learn from experience. I did take speech in high school, but what do you learn in speech in high school? And when I was in college, I was very involved, and I've never been a real shy person, so that wasn't a problem for me. But just to be comfortable in your own skin and to be able to go into any group or any situation, and sometimes they were not friendly groups, but to be able to come out alive. And I really just thoroughly enjoyed everything that I did, and I really tried to be a good working companion for him. So things went along, another election came along, and he ran for lieutenant governor again. This was his third term. And he believed that he should never run against someone that he worked with as governor. So if he served under a governor, that was going to run for re-election, then he wouldn't run against him for governor. So he really didn't know if his opportunity would ever come along. He just didn't think it was right to work with somebody and then, to be undermining them and eventually then run against him. So he would not do that. So that's why he had not attempted to run for governor again. He had lost that race way back. But the opportunity came along when he served under David Boren. David was governor, and everyone assumed he was going to run for a second term. And up until then, no one had been successful in being reelected in Oklahoma. But everyone assumed David was going to run for reelection. Well, at the last minute, he decided to run for Senate. So that opened the door for George then to run for governor. And it was a very difficult race because George got into it late. Everybody else had already declared and had already been campaigning for 6 months to a year. So we got a late start. But of course he had good name recognition and had been a good lieutenant governor because he had been everywhere. Every community in Oklahoma that wanted him for anything, he was there. So he had that advantage that he had good name recognition. But let me tell you, running for governor is a lot different than running for lieutenant governor. And it was a very, very strenuous campaign. He had a very viable candidate opponent who had been a OU football player, and as we all know, those people stay very popular through the years. But anyway, we sort of campaigned a different way. George would go one direction over the state with a group of people, and back then we would travel in groups, caravans as we call them, and we'd go from small town to small town. We might hit 8 towns in a day, but you'd have all these people traveling with you that would help you walk the streets, show support for you in a meeting, put up signs along the way. So we always had pickups loaded with signs and things like that. So George would go one direction, and we may not see each other for 2 weeks. And we had a lot of crazy, wonderful experiences out on those caravans. As you would go through towns, then maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people would join you, and you would, your caravan would become larger the longer you were on the road. But anyway, we were successful. He won his term as lieutenant governor in 78. His term began in 79. And so there I was, not having a clue as to what I was going to do. But we, of course, had all the wonderful balls and things that happen when you're elected, and we moved into the governor's mansion, and by then Mike was in college, and Georgianne was in the 8th grade. So she had grown up in the public schools, and moving to the governor's mansion, she thought was the worst thing that could possibly happen to her. And I can honestly say that it is very hard on children to be thrown into that situation. And here we were moving clear across town from where all of her friends were, from where her school was. And we just thought, well, she would go to Northeast High School, which was the closest high school to the mansion. But they informed us, no, she wouldn't go there. She would be bused about 20 miles. And I said, no, she's not going to be bused. I did not and still do not believe in busing. So we opted to let her go back to her home school. But we had to go through a lot to get permission for her to do that, because we were crossing school district lines. We're living in the mansion in Oklahoma City Public Schools. She had gone to Putnam City, which is an independent, separate school district. So we were crossing school district boundaries. So we had to get permission for her to do that and to pay tuition for her to go to the high school, to the junior high.
Wow.
Where she was going. And I can remember back then, we paid more for her to go to high school than we paid for her to go to OSU. Of course, you know, they wanted to make it difficult because they didn't want people to do that. But anyway, she went back to her junior high, and but she hated living in a governor's mansion. She was so isolated. You know, anyone that's familiar with where the mansion is located, you have no close neighbors. So it's not like someone's going to drop by, or you can have teenage friends that live by that can come by and you can go hang out with. So, and she had to be driven to school every morning by a highway patrolman, which just embarrassed her to death. So she would make them let her out about a half a block before she got to school, so no one would see a patrolman, you know, dropping her off. So it really was very, very difficult on her. And then when she got home in the evenings, there were no friends close by. So it was, that distance was a problem. But anyway, everybody lived through it. And she went on to high school, still staying in that same school district. And her first year in high school, again, was very traumatic. She was in a car with two of her friends and got out. They had played, she was an athlete, they had been playing in a softball game, so they took her back to her car. She was now driving. They went on up the street a block, hit a telephone pole, and they were both killed.
Oh my goodness.
So her sophomore year in high school was just sort of a blackout, because it took a long time for her to get over that experience. But anyway, we all survived. She became more used to it, and you know, as she matured, she realized what an opportunity she had living where she was living, and the things she was able to do that other kids weren't able to do, and the people she was able to meet. And anyway, she just matured enough to know that it was okay. And then, you know, when she got wheels, that made a difference too. But it still was a little awkward about, you know, the boy-girl situation. Boys didn't really want to have to come to the governor's mansion to pick up their date, to have to go through guards at the gate, and, you know, it's very intimidating. But I I think I can honestly say that probably college is really when she blossomed, when she matured, because she got away from us. And by then, George had run for the second term as governor and was successful. So she was in the 8th grade when he became governor. She was in her last semester of college when he left office. So you can basically say all of her teenage, young adult years, her father was governor.
Mm.
And but she went to OSU. She loved it, and joined a sorority. That was good for her because she had, her brother was enough older than she that he had been gone from home a long time. So she really was raised almost as an only child. So having the sorority and the closeness of the girls in the sorority house was really good for her. And she had a wonderful experience in college. And our son also went to OSU. So I'm a big fan of OSU. Even though George and I, neither one, went there, our children did, and most of our grandchildren. We still have a few that, a couple that aren't in college yet. But anyway, I'll sort of now have to regress to tell you about the things that I was involved in and the things that I enjoyed doing. During the period of time when George was lieutenant governor, the governor at that time was Dewey Bartlett, and he had requested that George make a tour of all state facilities. That being all colleges and universities, the prisons, state mental institution, the state mentally retarded institutions, anything that the state operated. So this took a year, and I went with George on most of these trips. And it was a very eye-opening experience to see these various institutions. And when we went on campuses, that was during the time of a lot of student unrest. And so that was really an experience. But the thing that made the biggest impact on me, at that time, Oklahoma had 3, they were called state schools for the mentally retarded. They were located in Pauls Valley and Enid and Sand Springs. And when we visited those 3 state schools, I was just, those people that were living there made such an impression on me. I felt like it was all new to me. I had never been around anyone that was mentally challenged like that. Back when I was in high school, I really didn't have, to my knowledge, anyone that in my school that was mentally challenged like that, because people didn't send them to public schools. So this was all new to me, and I saw so many people living there that I didn't feel like needed to be living there. They were more socially retarded than mentally retarded because they had been placed there when they were infants. Back, many years ago, we're now so accustomed to all the sophisticated testing that you can put a child through. Back then, there was none of that testing was available. So you had a child that something was wrong, and you didn't know what was wrong, and the doctors didn't necessarily know what was wrong, and they would recommend, I think it would be better if you would just put this child in an institution. Maybe that child was autistic, maybe they were just had dyslexia. Maybe they were deaf, and no one even realized they were deaf. Anyway, so many of these people were put there as babies and left for the rest of their lives. And they were not mentally retarded. Some of them were mildly retarded, but certainly could function in the outside world if given the opportunity. So I just almost became obsessed with their problems and trying to figure out what I could do to make a difference. I really wanted to be their spokesperson because I felt like they didn't have one. And not that the schools were not taking good care of them, but there was just so many that didn't need to be there, I thought. So when George was elected governor, I felt like that was my opportunity to help these people. Because, to be honest, it's a lot easier to get things done if your husband's governor than if he's not governor. So I wanted to seize the moment and to see if I could make something happen. So I had found out that most states had what they called group homes. Oklahoma had none. And so I decided that that would be what I would start working on. So I approached George with it, and George was like so many other people that don't understand mental retardation. Of course he's now educated himself, but back then people confuse mental illness with mental retardation, and it's not the same. Mental illness is a disease. Mental retardation is a condition, and there's no cure for it. And so many people were fearful of people that were mentally challenged, just simply because they didn't know. They didn't know how to respond to them, to interact with them. But anyway, when I approached George that I would like to start a program in Oklahoma of group homes, he said, I will put the money in my budget, but it's up to you to lobby the legislature to approve it. Well, it was at that time that I got a new appreciation for trying to get anything passed through the legislature. And really, I think the only reason I was successful is they just voted for it to get me off their back and to shut up. I don't really think they had a clue as to what they were voting for. But they thought, well, it's the governor's wife, we may need her help on something else, so let's...
Who ended up carrying the legislation?
I don't remember. There was a legislator in Tahlequah, I remember, but he's been gone for a long time, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. But they allotted me enough money for a pilot program. Well, we thought that we had enough money to start 10 group homes. But as it turned out, we had enough money that we were able to start a few more than 10. I don't remember the exact number, but it was more than 10. It involves so much. First of all, people didn't want them in their neighborhoods. So every place where we would decide we wanted to place one, we would have to appear before the city council, the zoning commission. We'd have to go through all that. Every home, you would have to go through the fire marshal, the health department. It was really much more involved than what I anticipated it would be. But we hung in there. I had a lot of support from the people at the Department of Human Services because this all came through them. Now, the state did not own the group homes themselves, the buildings, because the state couldn't own property like that. So what we would have to do would be to find a support group, say a group of parents or a church group or a civic group that would own the property, and then the state would provide everything else in that home for these residents. So now these had to be mildly retarded adults. So they had to be over the age of 18. They had to be medication free. They had to be able to work, some type of work. We didn't want them just sitting in a house watching TV all day. So then when you get into the work problem, that was the time before people were educated in hiring the handicapped. So we really had difficulty in finding jobs for them. So then that meant creating the sheltered workshops, which are all around Oklahoma. This was a controlled environment where these people could go every day, just like they're going to a job. And these workshops would they would obtain contracts from outside businesses to bring work in to the workshops so the people could work. They got paid for their work. They contributed to the group home where they lived, depending on how much money they made. They had to pay a certain amount of that. Many of them became taxpayers. As time went on, as people became educated in the workforce, a lot of them were able to get jobs, for instance, at OSU, in the colleges, in hotels, in nursing homes, in greenhouses, McDonald's, Target, they now are employing these people. So up until that time, if someone left a state home, they went to a nursing home. Well, they weren't old, number one, and they weren't sick. That was no place for them to live. And it would break my heart to go to these nursing homes and see a 25-year-old young man or woman just wandering around with nothing to do, no one their own age to
interact with.
And my goal was to try to get those that could leave the nursing homes. Now, some of them had health conditions that prevented them from living in a group home, but my goal was to get those people out of those nursing homes. And a group home basically was for depending on the size of the house, from 6 to 10 people. Could be all boys or all girls, or we had some homes where both would be living, with a house parent, 24-hour-a-day house parents. They had their own room, or they shared a room with someone. They could have their own, they could decorate the room like they wanted to. This was the first time many of them had ever lived in a home, in a home-like setting. They learned to cook. They prepared their meals. They kept their house clean. And finally, after lots of meetings, several years passing, the neighborhoods became very accepting of them because they were wonderful neighbors. they took such pride in their home. They kept their lawn mowed. They planted gardens. They planted flowers. If there were elderly people living on the street, they would help take care of them. And, they didn't have their driver's license, so there weren't 10 cars parked in the yards and out on the streets. And they became very good neighbors. And we were just there for years. I went to every group home opening that we had, and they were really springing up across the state. So we started with an allotment for 10, and we now have over 100 in the state. And that probably, if I had to say the one thing I was most proud of, it would be the impact we've been able to make on the lives of the mentally challenged. Of course, all the federal laws have changed since then. Now, a lot of the state schools have been closed or downsized, and more children are living at home now, and or are living in apartments with other mentally challenged people, and then they have caseworkers that take care of them. But through the years, a lot of things have changed. But the problems I see now is the federal government has mandated all of this for the public schools. You must do this, and you must do this, and you must do this. And they provide no money for it. Well, there's probably not a school district around that has all the money they need. So the money for the mentally challenged, the special classes in school, the special equipment that is required to teach these children is not there. So now the problems we face are making sure that we help the school districts in helping these young people be all they can be. And I still don't feel like things cannot be right for the rest of us until it's right for everybody. They have all the dreams that we have. They have all the desires that we have. They have all the rights that we have. And we should not be satisfied until they're able to accomplish all that they can. They have limitations, but to take them to that point that they have accomplished all that they can. And I think I can truthfully say, next to my family and my church, these people are the closest to my heart. And I'm still involved with a lot of them and a lot of the different groups. And another group of special needs children that George and I kind of focused on when we were living in the governor's mansion. We started an annual Easter egg hunt for the blind children. Well, you say an Easter egg hunt for the blind, and people just give you a look like, you've lost it. But it was wonderful. We got a teacher in the Oklahoma City Public Schools that taught these children to help us, because we knew, we didn't know how to go about this, and so she advised us. We invited every blind child. We sent out notices to all the school districts if they had blind children. We notified the School for the Blind, which is located in Muskogee. We went through every institution or school district that we could think of, making sure that all of the blind children knew about this. We had school buses lined up over there like you wouldn't believe. But the way we handled it, back then, AT&T was a big industry in Oklahoma City. and their retired employees had a group called the Pioneers. So we got the Pioneers of AT&T involved, and I'm sure a lot of you may not remember, but back then there were pantyhose that came in big plastic eggs. The pantyhose were called legs. We gathered up these big plastic eggs, and the Pioneers from AT&T installed beepers in these eggs. So the children hunted the eggs by the sound. We'd activate a switch on the outside. The teacher advised us that every student should be blindfolded. Well, I was just astonished. I just thought, you can't do that. You can't blindfold a blind child. And she said, oh yes, they'll think it's funny. And she said, there are various degrees of sight. And so to be fair for everybody, you blindfold everybody. Well, it just broke my heart, but we did it. We blindfolded everybody. And we divided them into age groups as far as hunting the eggs were concerned. But every child had someone to accompany them, to help them. We made sure that every kid found dozens of eggs. And we had all sorts of mascots there in their costumes. We had all sorts of live animals for them to be able to pet. And it was just fabulous. We had Easter bunnies, baby chickens, baby pigs. We just had everything there for them. But every child left there that day loaded with goodies. The Oklahoma Grocers Association provided us with all this stuff to put in baskets. So every child had a huge Easter basket and just all sorts of things that we got donated from people. It was the most gratifying thing and wonderful thing to watch. So we did that every year that we lived in the mansion. It was discontinued when we left, but I just have a special place in my heart for people with special needs, and still do. When it was getting close to the time that George was going to leave office, a group of my friends, as a gift to me, started the Donna Nigh Foundation. And most foundations are started because people have an abundance of money. This certainly was not the case. It was just started by a small group of people with small donations. And so when you think of foundations, we're very small. But we are the only foundation in the state that is specifically for the developmentally disabled. Mentally retarded is no longer politically correct. I still use that term a lot because that's what I've always, but it's developmentally disabled. And so we're the only foundation that is specifically for that. So we're still in operation, and it will be in operation long after I'm gone because of the way we've set it up.
And that was announced at one of your birthday parties?
I think it was my 50th.
Pretty good gift.
Pretty good gift. The specifications were that any money had to go to either individuals or groups that were developmentally disabled. So now, basically, the people that apply to us for aid are people who cannot get help from the federal government or from the state government. So they've sort of fallen through the cracks. Now, most of the people that request aid from us are families that are attempting to care for their loved ones at home, and they may need their bathroom renovated to be able to handle a wheelchair, or maybe a lift for a bathtub, or things of that kind. Or maybe they need special equipment, special computers that the child can use, maybe with a head wand, things of that type. And then we also get requests from special ed classes in public schools to help with a particular child, or maybe a piece of equipment that will help more than one child. Most of our requests come through caseworkers. They are involved with these families, and they see a need and know that the family is not able to provide for this. So that's where most of our requests come from. About 3 years ago, we gave $50,000 to the Tulsa Public Schools and $50,000 to the Oklahoma City Public Schools to make sure their facilities were up to code on the ADA, that they had automatic door openers, that their bathrooms would accommodate the handicapped, that they had railings down the hallway and things like that. So, like I say, in terms of foundations, we're small, but we're still able to help a lot of people. And contributions that are made to us, our bylaws specify that 50% goes into the endowment, and then 50% can be used. So we're still out there trying to help and trying to make a difference.
Well, something else you did during your years as First Lady, you were one of the first to open up the mansion to the public.
Yes, and that was fun. It had been opened just sporadically. A First Lady would do it maybe 2 or 3 times a year or something like that. But I really felt like I was living there, but the house really belonged to the people of the state, and they should have that right to come in and see it. So we had open house every Wednesday, 52 weeks of the year, and it was wonderful the way people responded. I went to various groups of women, clubs, church groups, whatever, and invited anyone that would be interested to be a guide. So we had guides that would take people through, and the one thing that was different about our open house is the entire house was open. Before, they had only allowed the first floor to be opened. Well, you don't really see the house or see how they're living with just the first floor. For people that have been there, the first floor is basically just about 4 rooms. So we opened up the whole house, which meant, you had to throw everything in the closet that day and shut the door and make it presentable. And Georgiana hated Wednesdays because she couldn't come home until open house was over. Or if she came home, she had to go hide out somewhere, maybe in the kitchen, because the kitchen wasn't on the tour. But we had thousands that came through the mansion. And we always had special open houses, of course, for the Christmas holidays, so people could see the mansion decorated. And it was really fun to explain the history of the house to people, and where certain items, furniture or whatever, where they came from. And people loved it. I thought it was a problem at the time, but as I look back, it was just part of people's lives there would not be a Wednesday go by but when George and I got ready to go to bed, there would be notes under our pillow on our bed. People would sneak when the guide wasn't looking. They would put a note. And it was usually something they wanted George to do, or something he did they didn't like, or my son is in prison and he's really innocent, his number is so XXXX, would you please do that type of thing. But there again, it was just people that needed help, and that was the only way they knew how to ask. And it was really strange. The majority of the notes, people would ask what side of the bed we slept on. And the majority of the notes were left under my pillow. Because I think people realized a woman can influence a man. So it was just great to be able to share that home, because it's a wonderful home. It's not a mansion. It's just a large, older home, and it's got a lot of rich history. Now, since we live there, of course, it's been totally redone, and it's fabulous now. The way it's decorated and the furnishings, it wasn't that nice when we lived there, but we thought it was wonderful.
Did you have a lot of say-so in how the decor looked?
Yes, we did. It's not that way now, because they have established a board that governs what is there, and everything in that house now is on the computer, and that's as it should be. So there's never any question about what belongs to whom. When we lived there, when we moved in, I'd say it was just about half furnished, so we had to bring a lot of our own personal furniture in. But that's not the way it is now. Everything that's there belongs to the state, and they keep track of it. They have a governing board, and what is now called Friends of the Mansion sort of supplies. We have various fundraisers. Supplies added money to do things there that the state can't do, like the wonderful pavilion that's there now, where large groups of people can meet, was a result of fundraising to do things that the state doesn't have the money to do. But it's, years ago there was a lot of talk about tearing it down or moving the mansion to another part of town, and I feel like it's right where it should be. It's close to the Capitol, and it's beautiful.
One more thing I'd like to cover with you before you leave us today. I read back in 1984, you were at the Democratic National Convention, and you had a striking resemblance to somebody.
Yes, that was fun.
Geraldine Ferraro.
And I look back at those pictures now, and we really did look alike. We were about the same age. We wore our hair the same way. We were about the same size. Anyway, there was really a striking resemblance. And the Democratic convention was held in San Francisco. And the first really big thing I can remember was there was a luncheon just for women, and there were literally, I started to say thousands, but there wouldn't have been thousands, but maybe 8,000 women at this luncheon. And it's when Jimmy Carter was president. And Rosalind Carter was presiding at this luncheon. Well, I arrive at the luncheon, and of course, anytime you have security guards with you, people think, she's somebody special. But I came in one door, kind of at the back of the room, and Mrs. Carter was up here at the front, and she said, "Ladies, Geraldine Ferraro, the candidate for Vice President of the United States." Everybody stood and applauded, and I was just, I didn't know what to do. I was doing this, and I was embarrassed because I thought she's going to be embarrassed when she realizes. And but then we went from there. It's when the Olympics were being held in Los Angeles. So we went from San Francisco to Los Angeles to attend the Olympics. Going into the Olympic grounds, of course, we had Los Angeles police. We had all this entourage. And we were on the grounds of the Olympics, and George and I get out of the car, and suddenly people say, "It's Geraldine, it's Geraldine." Well, I mean, I was just mobbed. And George just sort of stood back. I loved it because he wasn't getting any attention. But everybody was shoving programs at me, wanting me to. Well, I started out saying, I'm sorry, I'm not who you think I am, explaining. And it just got to be too overwhelming. So I just started signing her name. I just thought, I can't explain it to everybody. They'll never believe me. And so, Geraldine, if you're out there anywhere, believe me, I did not. I did not mean anything, but I didn't know how else to handle the situation. But lots of times our pictures were printed side by side, so people could see the resemblance. I haven't seen a picture of her recently, or in many years, so I don't know if we still resemble each other or not, but it was a fun thing in history.
That's a good PR, too. I mean, she's in two places at
Right,
one time.
right.
I mean,
I saw her. No, you didn't see her because I saw her.
But I would like to thank you for coming out today and sharing your story with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, July 29th, 2008. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Today we're here with Donna Nigh for the second half of our interview. We're so happy that you could join us one more time.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin by picking up a little bit where we left off. Take me through sort of the last few months of your time in office as First Lady.
It's a very difficult time because you suddenly realize that you don't have a house, you don't have a car, you don't have any furniture, you don't know where you're going to live. It's kind of like you've been living in public housing all these years, and so you have a lot to do. You have to make the decisions about where you're going to live. And George made a promise, I think more to himself than anyone, that he would not accept a job offer from anyone while he was in office, because he didn't want to appear that he was giving anyone any special favors. So when he left office, he did not have a job. So by then, of course, our children were gone, either out of college or in college. And so it's, you still have to go about your daily duties because you're still in office. So you still have the things that you have to do, but at the same time, making preparation for the life after. And it's very exciting. I've often said that I thought the perfect thing would be one term that was 6 years long instead of 4-year terms. And of course now, most governors, once they've been in for 4 years, they run for the second term. And George was the first one to succeed himself. But 8 years is just a little long. It was for me. I don't know that everyone feels that way. But you're getting a little weary and you're ready to have your own life. You're ready to be your own boss, to decide where you will go that day and what you will do, and there's not someone dictating every move that you make. But at the same time, it was a very sad time because it had been a wonderful period of our life, and one that I virtually loved. I loved what I did. I loved what was expected of me. I loved the people that we got to be around, all the activities. So it was a very melancholy time, but at the same time exciting because you were moving on to the next stage in your life. So we made the decision that we would stay in Oklahoma City, and of course George had no desire to go to Washington, so there was no political race in the future. He said that all along, but most politicians do say that. I'm not interested in any other job, but he really meant it. He had no interest in anything outside of Oklahoma. So we knew that his political life was over. So he was asked to do several things, and decided on going to the University of Central Oklahoma. And at that time, that was to teach. And so we got all settled, but it was it's a very unusual feeling, because when you've been doing something for 8 years, a lot has happened during those 8 years. For instance, we had never run our car through a car wash. And so one night we loaded up with quarters, knowing we probably would mess up. And we went at midnight, so no one would see us or recognize us and know that we didn't know how to go run our car through a car wash. So it was just little things like that. We were not used to carrying keys because somebody was always with us. We weren't used to carrying money. And I can't tell you the number of times we locked ourselves out of our house or out of our car, or would get someplace and wouldn't have any money or any credit cards with us. And of course, George had not driven a car for about, because he had a driver part of the time when he was lieutenant governor. So he really had not driven for about 12 or 16 years. So that was an experience. I probably had driven more than he had, because I would sneak off and drive myself places. But of course, there was no way he could do that. So it was just learning how to do a lot of things that people take for granted. And it wasn't that we couldn't do it or wouldn't do it, it's that they would not allow you to do it. And of course, keeping my own house, cooking all the meals. But anyway, it was a great, we had a lot of laughs at each other. And we settled into a routine just like everybody else. And we stayed in Oklahoma City for a while, and then we decided, since he was going to be in Edmond, that we would move to Edmond. So we moved to Edmond, and then a few years later, he was named president of the University of Central Oklahoma. And what was so great to me about that was I had attended school there. So, you think, well, never in your wildest imagination did you ever expect to come back to your alma mater as the wife of the president. So there were a lot of things about that job that sort of reminded me of being in politics. You still had all the things you had to do, all the places you had to be, dealing with the legislature, because it's very, it's very political, the funds that you get and all that. It was a little easier on George, having been there. He knew how to do it. But it was wonderful being around young people. They just brought a whole new vitality to your life, and being watching them advance through the years in their studies, and all the wonderful activities that take place. It just makes you feel young again. So the experience at UCO was really great. When the Regents hired him, they hired him to basically rebuild the campus and to rebuild the image of the school in the public's eye. It was not very good. So, he was not, other than having taught in high school, he was not an academician, and he didn't try to be. He let the vice presidents, the people, run the areas that they were to run, but his job basically was to rebuild the campus, which he did. And he told them when they hired him, he was the oldest person to ever be hired as president of a university, but he told them that he would stay at least 3 years and a maximum of 5 years. So he stayed the 5 years. But he said later, in looking back, he really wished he had stayed a couple of years longer, because a few of the projects were not completed when he left. But for anyone that knows the old UCO and then to see the present UCO, it's just wonderful, the transition that's been made, and the campus is just wonderful. And he developed, while he was there, it was an idea he had of getting bond money to build things. Now, bond money was not new, but bond money normally came if you were going to build something that brought in revenue. So to get bond money for something that was not going to bring in revenue was something new. So he went to the legislature and got approval to do that. So that's how they were able to build so much there. And since then, there's probably not a campus in Oklahoma that has not adopted, they call it the Nigh program, a way of funding buildings and then a way of paying the money back. But
well, what were some of the issues you championed as First Lady, now of a college, a university?
Well, I started an art gallery at UCO, and it's still there and has been improved upon since we were there. It's just like any art gallery. They have showings of various artists, and lots of times they have showings of faculty and students. It's a very popular place on campus, and it's a very nice art gallery. So that was the main thing I focused on. I still was involved in the School of Education in getting programs started for their teachers that were going to be dealing with the developmentally disabled, getting certain programs in the Department of Education. So that was about it.
That seems like a lot, just getting it going. Now, art's always been very important for you, even during your time in Oklahoma City. I read that you're just a big supporter of the arts, and you encouraged local art in the capital from civic organizations and clubs throughout Oklahoma. When you would go visit, you said, hey, instead of giving me plaques, give us art to display. Why is art so important?
I just really feel like art's a very important part of our lives, and a very important part of education in making sure that it is offered to everyone and let them experience. And we started the Artist in Residence programs, where these very well-known established artists, whether they be a storyteller or a sculptor or whatever their medium might be, their job is to go around the public schools and to be available to demonstrate and to help the teachers, have workshops for the teachers, to help them develop programs in getting the children more interested and more involved in the arts. Everybody can't be an athlete. Everybody can't be a 4-point student. We just need to make sure that it's offered to them, and then if they want to take advantage of it. But like you said, we did ask that people not give us little mementos that you have to sit around and dust. We asked for art because we thought when people toured the mansion, it would be interesting to them to see the art from people around the state. And I can remember during the, I think it was the bicentennial, no, not the bicentennial, what would have been the 75 years, Diamond Jubilee maybe. I got a group of legislators' wives to come to the Capitol, to the mansion, and we made a quilt for the Diamond Jubilee. And something like that's art. And every county in the state contributed a block. And they could have anything on their block that depict their county. Like if it was cornflowers, or if it was wheat, or if it was buffalo, or whatever, they quilted their own block, and then we as a group put it together. And the quilt, I think it's still out there floating around somewhere. It traveled all over the state to all the fairs, and anybody that wanted to use it or exhibit it could do that. So we just tried to get as many different groups to give everybody the opportunity to be recognized. I can remember there was a great organization called the China Painters of Oklahoma, and they painted a set of china for the mansion. I bought the china. It was just plain white china, and it was of the wildflowers of Oklahoma. And it's still there. It's still being used, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And they did not allow any one painter to complete a piece. They didn't want them to be able to say, I made that plate or I made that cup. So maybe you were an expert in painting pansies. So you would just paint a pansy, and then you would go on to the next piece and paint a pansy. And then whoever was good with butterflies maybe would do the butterfly. And so the pieces were passed around to the women, and they painted whatever they were good at. And then we put a gold edging around the white china, and it's absolutely beautiful. The set of china is absolutely beautiful. So that was another way to show, to spotlight our artists in Oklahoma. And we have so many. I think when people think of art in Oklahoma, they just think of Western art. But there certainly is more out there. more talented people out there. You know, the storytellers to me were a very fascinating group of people. And just like you're doing here with this oral history is so important to pass down to the young people.
Well, take me through life after UCO.
Oh gosh. Life after UCO, we moved back to Oklahoma City, and of course George retired. He's probably retired about 5 times, and he's still working. And we bought a house in a neighborhood that we had always admired. It was an older neighborhood with lots of trees, and we just sort of went about our daily lives. I still spend 75% of my time doing volunteer work. That's what I was doing then, and George did contract work for 2 or 3 different people. So we have a house on Grand Lake, so we spend quite a bit of our time there when we can. We enjoy that very much, and it's a place to go to get away, but it's also a place to take your friends and take your family for special occasions. So you know, when you think about, George has been out of office for 20 years. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we walk down the street and everybody, you know, knows who we are. It's that so much time has passed that we're just the average guy on the street. You know, it's funny sometimes, and I've done it too, you'll see somebody and you'll think, I know them. Where did I know them? And so people have asked George, the one I loved is, oh yeah, you're the weatherman. They knew they'd seen him, and so they decided he was the weatherman.
I could think of worse things. So
that's right.
We'll take weather.
Right.
I'd just like to get your thoughts on a few things. First off, were you in Oklahoma, near Oklahoma City during the time of the bombing?
Yes. That's when George was at UCO.
Okay.
And I can remember I was out in my backyard talking on a cell phone to a friend of mine, and we both said, "Did you hear that?" We both heard it. And gosh, we lived probably 15 miles from downtown. But for some reason I just thought, oh, somebody broke the sound barrier, you know, a plane. But of course it wasn't very long till I found out what had happened, and it was a very important part for UCO because they have a very good, large nursing school at UCO, and George dismissed all of them, and all the nursing students went as a body downtown to help, and they were there for many days. So UCO offered a lot of their services, their security, anything that was needed that we had. And of course we were so close. So it was a very, very strange time to be around. You know, I can remember for several weeks afterwards, you could not leave your house that you were not caught in a funeral procession, because, you know, so many people were found several weeks later. So the funerals just went on for weeks. And I personally did not have any close friends that lost their lives. I knew a lot of people that were injured, and several of the people that were killed, I knew who they were. But as far as having anyone close to me, I did not. But it was a strange time in Oklahoma's history, and I think what a horrible way for people to recognize you. But Oklahoma truly was recognized at that time for our people, our willingness, the ability to bring all the forces together in a hurry and to do what had to be done. And I don't think many people will ever forget, just like you knew where you were when this happened and 9/11 and when Kennedy and all these things. Well, anybody that lives around here remembers that day, and what a horrible day it was not only in the history of Oklahoma, but in the history of the nation.
Absolutely. And now we have this, beautiful monument to remember.
And it is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
You being from out of state, do you remember when it happened?
I do. Mm-hmm. And it's just like any event, it's just you're in shock, and not living here, I can't imagine what Oklahomans were going through. But one thing that was clear was the immediate mobilization of resources and Oklahomans helping Oklahomans.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the ministers of the churches were there to assist. People that did things like masseuses, you wouldn't think of that, but they were there to help relieve when the firemen and policemen would get a little time off to rest. They were there to, give them little massages on their shoulders and their arms, and just all different types of vocations were able to be utilized. And the people that could not go, well, like myself, I had no reason to go. I didn't want to get in the way, but you could drop off clothing, or every day they would say what they needed there. Perhaps it was bottled water, perhaps it was towels, whatever. There was something for everybody, and I would say virtually everybody was involved. And at that time when it happened, Bill Clinton was president, and he appointed George head of a committee to raise funds so that any child of someone that was killed would be guaranteed a college education, totally paid for. So George chaired that committee to raise the funds, and they did that. And I remember seeing in the paper just like last year or something, the first child graduated that had been a part of that. And they didn't put any restrictions, like they didn't have to go to school in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to go to a 4-year college. Like if a young lady wanted to go to beauty college, she could do that. Or if you wanted to go to California to go to college, you could do that. So it was wonderful, and it also paid for the widows that were left that were pregnant at the time that happened. That unborn child was also covered. So later on, President Clinton came to the campus of UCO. That was his only public appearance as president in Oklahoma. And he came to just to congratulate the school and what they had done. And of course, he met with the people that were raising the funds for the education. But that was a big thing for UCO to get the President of the United States to come and visit.
Well, I know you've had the opportunity to work with many key legislators through your career. One in particular I'd like to get your thoughts on is Hannah Atkins. Did you have many dealings with her?
Not personally, but we were around Hannah a lot because Hannah was very important to my husband during his administration. She helped him, I think, understand and to better communicate with that community. And she was such a lovely, intelligent lady that, if she saw him doing something that she didn't think was appropriate, or she could think of a way he could better handle a situation in dealing perhaps with the Black Caucus or whatever, she was always by his side. And as best I remember, he appointed her Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just a lovely lady, and I was around her a lot. But as far as having any dealings with any of my projects, I did not. I was just associated with her through George.
Did you do, outside of what we've talked about with the homes, did you do any other lobbying on a daily basis while you were First Lady?
No, not really.
Okay.
You find out very quickly that they do not want you over there. They really don't. They just really don't think that's the place for the wife of the governor. That she should stay out of the. And I tried.
Mm-hmm.
I really did try to make myself scarce. I never went into the Capitol unless I had business there. I didn't just hang around. And at the time, my office was at the mansion. I think now the First Lady's office is in the Capitol. But they really just think that it's not the place for the governor's wife. So, other than that one experience, and to be quite frank, I didn't want any more experiences. I learned that dealing with the legislature was very difficult. The games they play, and I wasn't used to it. But I understand why they do what they do. But it's a tough game, because it's I'll do this for you if you'll do this for me, and I just didn't think that was my place. Now, I'm not going to say I didn't try to influence my husband in certain matters, but it always was to me matters of the heart, things that I was really interested in, that I felt like maybe he didn't really understand what was going on and what was needed and what was involved. And so, we had open house every Wednesday at the Capitol, and there was not at the mansion, there was not a Wednesday went by when open house was over that I didn't find notes left around the house, and usually under my pillow in the bedroom, wanting me to try to influence him to do something. Because I think most people realize that wives do have influence over their husband. Why not take advantage of it?
Well, one of the questions we try to ask of the inductees. I think we learn the background we need for our careers in different places, whether it's in the classroom or out in the field. Where are some of the places you feel like that prepared you the most for the work you did as First Lady, as an advocate for children?
I really don't think I had any preparation for it. As I mentioned before, I was a single parent. I was just working hard to keep my head above water. And I think most of the things I learned and the things I became passionate about happened after the fact, after I got involved and after I saw what I felt like was needed or things that I could be effective in. It was at that time. So I would say most of my, I was self-taught. Tried to learn all I could about the things I was interested in and tried to surround myself with knowledgeable people that were educated in those fields that could help me understand and be more effective.
Any major stumbling blocks or adversity you faced along the way?
Well, we had a lot of stumbling blocks with the group homes. That was one of those things that nobody really wanted to talk about or to get involved in because it meant things happening in their neighborhood that they didn't understand. And most of the misunderstanding was just not being educated. Most people think being mentally retarded is the same thing as being mentally ill. So most people were frightened. We would hold town meetings to try to explain to them and to educate them a little bit as to the population, about the population that would be living in their neighborhoods. The stumbling blocks were the city councils that would not grant us zoning for neighborhoods. There again, they were responding to the people in their towns, which is what they're supposed to do. But we had stumbling blocks, but we really were able to work through them after we explained what we were doing, and I would say almost without exception, they all proved to be an asset to the community, to the neighborhoods, and something that was sorely needed to be able to say we're giving everybody a chance, and those people needed a chance.
Needed somebody to believe in them.
Well, I believed in them, and I think I was just always so grateful that I had healthy children, and we never know when those things can happen to us. And I would look at those parents and think, I could not imagine what their life was like because they could never get away from it. It wasn't like, okay, they're going to graduate from high school and then they're going to go to college and be out on their own. For the most part, these people were going to be living with their parents for the rest of their lives. And, I would see young couples that would have a handicapped child, and so many of them were severely handicapped. And you stop and think they could never go out to dinner. They could never go to a movie. They had no relief because there were not trained people to come in and take care of that child. So we did establish respite care around in some of the communities, like if a family wanted to go on a vacation, that there was a place for this child to stay for a week or two, or maybe just for an evening out, or just to spend one night. Maybe they had to go to a funeral somewhere. It's a big problem for these families that don't have perhaps family members to help them out, to know what they're going to do with that child when emergencies arise, or just to be able to hold your marriage together. It's very hard on marriages to have children with chronic diseases, or to be developmentally disabled. Of course, there are various degrees of it, and some were just a lot worse than others. But my heart always went out to those parents that really had no life outside of taking care of that child. And that was going to be forever.
Mm-hmm. What are a few of your big highlights? It's plural, so you could have more than one.
Oh gosh, I should have thought about this. Of course, you have highlights in your family, and then you have highlights in your job, your profession. But every year, the governors in the fall have a meeting, a governor's meeting, that's always held in Washington. Now, in the summertime, their meetings, they move around. But the winter governor's meeting was always a really big deal. And, we always had a formal dinner at the White House, and very formal. And that was always very exciting, to be there with the other governors and the President of the United States. Other highlights were, being able to travel to exotic places that I would not have ever been able to have done otherwise. And we established relationships with towns in Japan and in China and in Mexico and various other countries. So some of the places that I was able to travel were highlights. Election night was always a highlight. Fortunate for me, we were never on the losing side. So now before George and I were married, he had lost a race, but after we were married, we did not have a losing race. So that was always a big highlight. Watching your children grow and mature and succeed and those kinds of things. But, I'm sure I'll get home and I'll think, well, why didn't I think of this? But just having things happen and being able to do things that are out of the ordinary was a highlight for me, because I grew up very modest. I had a very modest upbringing. My family never traveled much. I just basically went to school and worked, and so this was all. My life became sort of a fairy tale, but I really tried to earn. I felt a deep commitment to not just be the governor's wife. I wanted to be my own person and to be known for the things that I did on my own. I didn't want to just hang on to his coattail. And I really tried to pay back. One time I remember I was at a luncheon and I sat next to a Catholic nun, and she made a statement to me that I've never forgotten, and she said, "Service is the price we pay for the space we occupy." And I've really tried to live my life that way, because I truly believe that we all owe something. We need to give back because of the space we occupy here on earth, and the wonderful things that have been afforded us. We need to pay back.
Wow, that's just a great outlook.
Well,
let's back up. You mentioned election night. Did you have watch parties, or try to take me through a typical election night? Nervousness?
oh goodness. Yes, no matter how well you thought you were doing or you were going to do, you always have those maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's an hour, or maybe it's the whole evening, because it depends on where the votes are coming from that are being counted first. So, maybe early on in the evening you're ahead by 20,000 votes, but then you realize, well, that's coming from someplace you ought to do well. What about all these counties that you're not doing well? So it's all night long, no matter what the polls have shown or anything, you really never know. And you're scared to death to, declare victory or to act too heady about it all until it's all said and done. But we always had watch parties, and we had fun watch parties. We made them to where anybody was welcome, anybody could come, and we normally would go to Tulsa first, since we lived in Oklahoma City and the capital was in Oklahoma City. We wanted to end the evening here, so early in the evening we would go to Tulsa to our watch party there, and that would involve other counties in that area, and then we would fly here to be here for the latter part of the evening. But it was just such fun. And I can remember one race that we thought there was no question that we were going to win, and we were going to win big, and we barely squeaked by. So you never know, but it's a fun experience. It really is.
And did you have a role during the swearing-in ceremonies?
Well, the wife traditionally holds the Bible that her husband uses during the swearing in. So, yeah, you're up there. It's the judge, and you and your husband, or you can't say that anymore. You and your spouse, I guess. And then your family is seated there on the platform with you. And of course, with it always being in January, you never knew what the weather was going to be like. And I can remember one in particular that literally our feet, our shoes froze to the platform. It was that cold. So none of ours were ever held indoors because of the weather, but the weather could be pretty rough in January. But then you have a public reception where you stand in line, and anybody that wants to can come in and go through the receiving line. And it's not just you, it's all the statewide elected officials. So it's a very busy time. Then you have a ball. That's fun, but all those things are a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have worked very hard to make them successful. Excuse me. I remember George's last election. He carried all 77 counties. He's the only person to ever do that. So he wanted at the ball to have 77 trombones march in. So the music director at OU, the song 76 trombones, well, ours was 76 plus 1. And they obtained a trombonist from every county in the state. And that trombonist wore their local band uniform. But that was how that ball was opened, with those 77 trombonists marching in, playing the song. So we always tried to make everything fun. Fun more than stuffy, not too formal, because we wanted everybody to feel like they could come and to be a part of it.
Well, that's a great way to include the state in such a, widespread victory. I mean, carrying all 77 counties, that's good stuff.
The last election, Governor Henry carried, I think 70, all of the counties except the Panhandle. And he accused George of going out there and campaigning against him, so he wouldn't, so he wouldn't carry him.
The record has to stay.
Oh, that was funny.
Well, moving towards the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, do you remember when you were notified that you were going to be inducted?
I don't. I can remember the night,
Mm-hmm.
particularly because my daughter at the time was living in Georgia, and I arrived that night for the festivities, and there my daughter was, and her husband, and my two-year-old granddaughter. So that was a big surprise and a big thrill, but I was so honored to be a part of the Women's Hall of Fame, and I think I hope it will always continue. I don't even know how many they induct now each year, but it was fairly new when I was inducted. I don't even remember the year. Do you have that?
You were inducted in 95, and I believe they started inducting folks in 89.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it is relatively new. Mm-hmm. What does this type of honor mean to you? You've been honored many times for many, many different things, but in particular, this honor.
To be recognized as an individual, and again, not just because I was the governor's wife,
Mm-hmm.
because as an individual, I tried to contribute, and hopefully, it will, down the road, if these interviews are listened to by young women, hopefully the Women's Hall of Fame, and when young women can see that women are recognized for their accomplishments, that it will be an encouragement to them. But see, when I was inducted, George had been out of office for several years. So I was totally shocked that I would be included, because, you know, there are so many women who, professional women, scientists, teachers, astronauts, you name it, we have them in Oklahoma. And just to be included in that group was a great honor for me.
How do you feel that now people look to you as that role model?
Nobody looks to me for a role model.
Oh, come on.
I don't know. I just don't ever think of being a role model. Is there another question?
Sure. If you could give any piece of advice to your fellow Oklahomans, what would you tell them?
To be proud of their state. I've always felt like we've kind of had the tendency to apologize for the fact that we live in Oklahoma. Why would you live in Oklahoma? You know, what does Oklahoma have to offer? Why would? And I think our pride has really increased in the last 20 years. People are taking more pride, but you know, it's what better place in the world could you live? You know, you look at all the statistics and the polls that come out about most economical place to live, the safest place to live, where the unemployment is the lowest. That's not to say that there's not so many things that we could improve upon. We can always improve, but I think anyone that moves here from out of state, probably the first thing they would tell you that they liked about Oklahoma are the people. And I think that's the greatest thing we have going for us. And just to keep up being who we are. I think, you know, we've been through some really tough times and some really horrible things have happened to Oklahoma and to Oklahomans, and we always come through. And of course, you know, we're teased a lot about our tornadoes and things like that, but name a state that doesn't have some natural disaster that they deal with. You know, it's going to be hurricanes, or it's going to be forest fires, or it's going to be something. So we're no different than anybody else. Everybody has their natural disasters that occur, but being one of the youngest states, and to see the progress that we've made and the wonderful, talented people that have come out of the state. I mean, you name a profession or an occupation, and almost without exception, there's an Oklahoman either at the top or near the top. We have produced some wonderful, wonderful, talented people. And I would just like to see us sing our praises, you know. If we don't toot our horn, who's going to toot it? So just be glad, be happy where you're from, be proud of the people that are here, and no matter where you go, to not be embarrassed to say where you're from. And, it's kind of fun to go anywhere in the world, and there's not anyone that hadn't heard of our state song. Name one other state that has a state song that everybody recognizes. So we just need to play on all of the wonderful things that have happened and be optimistic. Be optimistic about the future.
Well, my second to the last question is, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
That I cared. I truly care about Oklahoma. I want Oklahoma to be the very best it can be. I want all of our people to be given the opportunities, not just a few, but that everyone be given. I like to say things cannot be right for any of us until it's right for all of us. And that is being socially accepted with whatever has happened, to be given all the opportunities, whether it's in school or in athletics or professionally in the workplace, that everybody have a place in society where they can feel good about themselves. All of us like to feel good about ourselves. And those people that have been dealt some hard blows in life, they deserve that right too. They deserve the right to feel good about themselves, and to give them the opportunity to be the very best that they can be. I would just like to be remembered for someone that worked toward that end and truly cared that everybody be treated the same and be given the same opportunities.
Finally, is there anything that I have not asked you that you would like to make mention of? Anything that I've left out that you'd like to include?
I think you've done a pretty good job of covering my life. It's been a good life, one that I'm very grateful to have been given the opportunities that I have. And I just hope that I will always feel like I've made the most of those opportunities. But I love what you're doing. I love for women to be recognized. I love for minorities to be recognized. It's an exciting time to be alive. Things are happening now that we never, in our wildest imagination, ever thought we would see happen. And I think that oral history is extremely important. I think occasionally I'll say something or mention something that happened to me in my life, and my daughter will say, "Well, I didn't know that. You've never told me that." And I think we don't, just even in dealing with our families, our children, our grandchildren, we don't realize how important some of the little things that we've forgotten will be to them. So I think I commend you all for what you're doing to make oral history important, and I hope that it can be utilized to its fullest. OETA or anything that would get it out to the public, to let the people see what they didn't have the chance to live through, how important you know, everyone in Oklahoma is an immigrant. I mean, we all came from somewhere. And I've been studying my own genealogy, and I've learned a lot of things about my own family. So I commend you all for what you're doing, and I appreciate being a part of your study of the women in the Hall of Fame.
Well, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much again for sharing your story with us.
You're so welcome.